September 1931. 25 miles off the English coast, the trawler Kalinda braves the harsh conditions of the North Sea. Through the freezing air and frostbite-inducing seawater, which soaks them to the bone, the crew haul up their nets, bringing in the sea's bounty. Shipmaster Skipper E. Lockwood spots a large, rotting mass caught in one of the nets. Striking the mass with a shovel to break it up, a piercing, metallic clang rings through the air, shaking through the skulls of the crew and bringing them all to a halt. Believing he struck steel, Lockwood digs through the peat, but to his surprise, he uncovers an ancient 8.5-inch serrated blade made of antler. This blade would be dubbed the Kalinda Harpoon, and its discovery would set in motion the efforts to uncover the mysteries of Doggerland, Europe's Atlantis.
I'm Hawk Tallman.
And I'm Jacob McKenna,
This is Under the Dirt.
and we are the Fossil Fellas.
Hey, Jacob, you said Europe's Atlantis at the end there, but isn't Atlantis Europe's Atlantis?
Well, the thing with that is, Atlantis was Greek, right? And Greece, according to a Greek friend of mine, Greeks aren't really European, so I don't really, I don't really consider it to be part of Europe.
Okay, okay.
No,
All right.
it sounded cool, so I put it in. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Let's get into this.
Yeah. All right. So
So
today on Under the Dirt,
are you started?
what?
You started?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
You go.
So as I was saying, today Under the Dirt. Welcome back, by the way. A little longer than a month in between episodes, but
But
school and all that.
that's unusual. We will be getting out videos on a more regular basis. Oh, also, I would like to throw this out here right at the beginning, because of how short everyone's attention span is nowadays. There is now an Under the Dirt Instagram where you can get updates on when videos drop, future videos, and special content. There will be a link to the Instagram in the description of this video.
Yeah, I'll make sure to do that. Anyways, so with that out of the way, today on Under the Dirt for the third time, we're gonna be talking about Doggerland. Now, uh, Doggerland was what is now the North Sea. In between England and Scandinavia and continental Europe. So what we're gonna be talking about throughout the episode is the history of Doggerland, its escape from under the glaciers, and then its eventual sinking about 18,000 years later, I believe it was. I have the timeline here.
Uh, I think because everything it's a little tricky. We have the dates a little mixed up because a lot of things like to jump between saying like however many thousand years ago and like 18,000 or like 8,000 BC,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that's different than 8,000 years ago.
We'll
So
bring that up a little later. But yeah, we're gonna talk about the history of it, and then differently than last episode, because last episode was a bit of a debate. Go check out episode 1 if you haven't, by the way. We're going to have more of a discussion on modern archaeological issues. Issues facing archaeologists today, right? Like literally right now as we're speaking, because this is an ongoing, I guess you could call it an investigation into Doggerland. Um,
I mean,
but
it's maybe not investigation. It's just it's a study. Like
yeah, an ongoing
Doggerland is
study.
not something that has been. Doggerland is definitely an ongoing study. It has not been 100% investigated or uncovered. And um, from that one article, Jacob, weren't they just now starting to? Because what's it called? They had just narrowed down at the end of one of the articles. I believe it was the Archeology Magazine. They were just now starting. They know now where there was most likely there were. Oh my goodness, I can't talk today. There were heavily populated areas in Doggerland. They believe they finally narrowed those down, and they're going to look into those more. So this is very much an ongoing thing.
Yeah. We'll get into that in just a little bit, but right now let's talk about the history of Doggerland. So, Um, let's go back to the Ice Age, or the previous glacial maximum. Uh, Glacial maximums and minimums are becoming kind of a theme on the channel.
Mhm.
Anyways, so About 22,000 years ago, or 20,000 BCE, was the start of Hawk. You forgive me if I'm misremembering here. Was the start of the current glacial minimum, correct?
Yeah, yeah. About 13,000 years ago was the start of the current glacial minimum. That's correct.
13,000?
13th when the glaciers start receding is the end of the last ice age.
Oh, okay,
Or is it
interesting.
13,000 BC?
Uh, Probably 13,000 BC. Well, because
Oh
I
my
have
goodness.
anyway. So I
I
have
think
written
it's
here that
13,000 years ago.
yeah, I have written here that 20,000 BC is when the ice sheets exposed Doggerland to air for the first time.
That could be.
Yeah. So okay. Yeah, I have. That's what I have written down here. So
Yeah,
20,000
right then.
BC, 22,000 years ago, the ice sheets retreat enough that Doggerland, again the area in between England, Scandinavia, and what would be the Netherlands, is exposed to air, and people begin to move in. And
Mhm.
now, as the as the climate begins to change, um, you know, ice sheets begin to melt until eventually we were left with only the polar ice caps. And about, so I was wrong earlier, 14,000 years later, so 8,000 years ago, or 6,000 uh, BC, uh, Doggerland is sunk by rising sea levels. So
Right,
that,
yeah, yeah.
so yes,
It was 18. Yeah.
yeah. So the lifespan of Doggerland is 14,000 years, right? And during that time, where am I going with this? Sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second. So yeah, that's the lifespan of Doggerland. But we, modern people, were unaware of this until recently. Um,
1931.
yes, 1931. Now, there was some knowledge of it prior to that. There was the understanding by sailors and by some scientists that, yeah, at some point this land was probably exposed because we have this bank here, the Dogger Bank, where Doggerland gets its name. That is very shallow water, and we can guess like, oh, well, that was probably exposed some time ago. But it's not until September 1931, when that harpoon is uh, dredged up out of the North Sea, that people were like, oh, there were people here. This, because this was the North Sea is between like 200 and 400 feet deep, I believe. So they're like, oh, so this sea levels were way lower, and that's like the first time we're kind of getting that idea. But
Mhm.
what's interesting is people were still thinking that, like, oh, well, this must have just been a land bridge, right? This must have just been people walking to and from, what is now England and the Netherlands or France or Germany. It's not until 1998 that Bryony Coles writes a paper called Doggerland, a speculative survey. And essentially, what this paper does is it poses the idea that, hey, people probably lived here, not just passed through. We should maybe look into this with a more archaeological lens, see if we can't find, you know, remnants of civilization. And that really is what kicks off the uh, push to discover the mysteries of Doggerland, as I said.
Mhm. There was also the understanding because of the Netherlands' efforts to increase its landmass. Um, the way that they've gone about that is they take sand out of the North Sea and they dump it on. So people have been finding um, Doggerland artifacts since that has started on the newly added coasts in the Netherlands because they trawl up all the sand and it gets dumped and the artifacts go along with it. So just to add on to that, people have been finding Doggerland artifacts for like quite a while,
Yeah, yeah.
even though no yeah, even though no formal scientific interest has really been shown
Yeah.
until recently.
And thank you for reminding me of that. Actually, I do remember there were some private collections from, I want to say, as early as 1919 that had artifacts that had
Mhm.
been dug out of the or like washed up on the shore of the North Sea, but it really was like the Kalinda harpoon that was like, oh, this was so deep that either people were fishing and this fell overboard on a ship, but as far as we know, the people of that time were not so advanced in seafaring as to do that.
Mhm.
Because inevitably, the reason I say that is the Kalinda harpoon was dated to be about 13,000 years old. And how they did this was there was some pollen still on it that they were able to date. Uh,
That it was pollen from the peat,
yeah, yes, that is correct.
not on the harpoon. So the date of the harpoon has been matched to the date of the peat. They were able
Yes,
to date the peat from the pollen.
that's correct. Yes, but what's interesting about that is that because they were dating pollen, that does indicate that whenever this harpoon was dropped, it was dropped on dry land, not off of the side of a boat.
Yep.
So that was like the first solid evidence that yeah, this was a landmass on which people walked.
Hmm.
Anyways, so that Bryony Coles paper I mentioned earlier in 1998, that led Vincent Gaffney and Simon Fitch, to archaeologists, English archaeologists, to start really pushing and looking into Doggerland, and they so far have been kind of the heads of the you know heads of the movement to uncover Doggerland.
Yep. And interesting as so as they started to get going, with Doggerland, right? They ran into a slight problem. Um, as to do archaeology, you need to actually be able to be on the ground that you are excavating. You need to be actually, and the problem with Doggerland is Doggerland is under, what is it, 200 and how deep is the North Sea? 200 and
I think it's 200 to 400 feet.
yeah, 200 to 400 feet of water. So how exactly are we going to go about um, knowing where things are? Uh, Luckily enough, the North Sea is also a huge place for oil drilling. There's oil rigs all over the North Sea. I think it's like an estimated 300 and 300 and not 350, like 35 billion barrels of oil have been taken out of the North Sea.
35 billion.
It's something like that.
That yeah, I didn't
Yeah.
know that number. That's
Um
incredible.
yeah, North Sea is huge on oil. Um so they have uh oil companies have all of this data from scanning the floor of the North Sea to find oil. So they gave some of this to the researchers, and the oil company considered this a small uh, of they considered it a very small amount of data. It was 2,300 square miles. And even though the oil company considered this an incredibly small amount of data, this has become the biggest archaeological survey ever taken.
Yeah. So, and I have a little more information to give on that. So, as I mentioned, Simon Fitch and Vincent Gaffney, they were leading the charge on this attempt to get this seismic data. And in 2001, the oil company um, PGS, I should have written out the full name and not just the uh, acronym, but PGS handed again that small amount of data, which in metric is 6,000 square kilometers, which was massive for the archaeological community.
Hmm.
And
And
then
didn't it beat the other record holder? The other record holder was one on Easter Island that was only like 11 square miles, right?
yeah, yeah, I can pull that up in just a second. But so the initial donation of this data was 6,000 square kilometers, but after Gaffney and team produced their first map, they gave them another 19,000 square kilometers of data.
Mhm.
So yeah, it was huge. Eventually, I think the current map is there's a model of it that you can find online, I believe, and it's about 46,000 square kilometers.
Yeah, we'll put it up on screen.
If we, yeah, we'll put a few images up of what Doggerland looked like throughout the millennia.
Mhm.
Anyways, so they get all this data. from these oil companies, and they start putting together all these maps. So they're finding, now underwater seabed or riverbeds and lakes and whatnot, and you know, using a combination of archaeological techniques such as getting core samples from soil and dating that to see what the environment of Doggerland was like, what sort of flora and fauna were
Mhm.
there. They're also using just uh, some anthropological techniques and just general intuition to figure out, based off of this seismic data and what the land looks like, where is it likely that people would have lived. And as Hawk mentioned, it was only within the last year or so that they figured out, hey, this location is most likely where we're going to find human evidence of human activity.
Right. The Doggerland is full of it, full of
Yes.
evidence of human activity. If I remember, so for the first, oh my goodness, so for the first several thousand years after it was exposed, and you guys can look through the sources for this. I don't remember the exact dates. I should have written them down. Um, Doggerland was part of the Mammoth Steppe, and
Yes.
that's what it was. That covered almost all of Eurasia for most of the, I want to say, Pleistocene, the last ice age. Um, then after the last ice age, as we started to enter our glacial, uh, there was glacial recedings. Doggerland became a wooded wetland, and it was such an ideal location that currently it's believed that it was the most densely populated place in Europe during the Holocene.
Is most densely populated.
Yeah, in terms of humans.
Yeah. Yeah, I should apologize. My wording wasn't there. Not, I didn't mean to say evidence of human activity. I meant human habitation. Because as
Ah,
I
okay,
mentioned
yeah, yeah.
prior, it was viewed as just a land bridge, and it was only with that 1998 Brioni Coles paper that we started looking at it as a potential human habitation site. So, minor
Right.
correction there.
So that's crazy. So, but yeah, not just humans, loads of animals would have lived in Doggerland. If I remember, there are fossils of mammoths, horses, um, human skeletons, of course, not skeletons, fossils, all sorts of human, um, all sorts of evidence of animal and floral life have been found down on the bottom of the North Sea.
Yeah, we just the only issue we're having is we need to. A lot of that has been dredged up in these, like land reclamation attempts by the Dutch government,
Yep, or by
or
fishing boats.
or by fishing boats or trawler, such as the Kalinda. Actually, fun fact, I mentioned earlier the Dogger Bank, which is where Doggerland was named from. The Dogger Bank got its name from Dutch fishing vessels, which were called doggers. So,
What?
yeah, it all goes back to the Dutch and their ships.
Oh my goodness.
Anyways, and also one more slight thing, that PGS I mentioned earlier, which provided the data to Gaffney and crew, that's Petroleum Geoservices. So now,
Mhm.
Hawk, I don't know if I'm not a big fan of big oil, but you got to give it to Petroleum Geoservices. They did make possibly the largest, you know,
They,
uh,
yeah, they kind of
advancement
clutched
in
up.
archaeological knowledge in the last century.
Yep. Um, yeah. One of the things I was wondering, now that we've I think everyone has a pretty good idea on Doggerland, um, we can kind of go into a bit of a discussion. One of the things I'm wondering is that a vast majority, and maybe they could use this to look in. I didn't find anything in any of the papers I read. Um, a vast majority of the tools found from Doggerland, like the Kalinda harpoon, are that they're harpoons, they're barbed tips. So I'm wondering if researchers have speculated is as if we can use the fact that almost everything has been barbed to look into how people in Doggerland would have lived. Like it seems pretty obvious they would have lived off of mostly fish if almost all of their hunting tools were barbed.
Hmm. That's interesting. I didn't know that actually. I didn't catch that. must have overlooked it.
Yeah, it's in the thing. It's in the archaeology magazine paper.
Well, yeah. Go check out
It's
these
something like
archaeo.
2,000 of the things dredged of the artifacts dredged up from the bottom have been barb tips.
Yeah, I mean that could suggest they live mostly off of fish, but it could also just be that they preferred barb tips for hunting. We've seen,
Right. It also, I mean, I don't know too much about this. That could also totally be a cultural thing.
yeah, it could be. The Kalinda harpoon actually, going into a little more detail on it. I'll throw an image up on screen. Um, was almost decorated. Like it had a lot of
Yeah, it's not.
yeah, like carved into it
Yeah, it's
were
not just that.
these like it was rather simple, just line work, but it was clearly like someone this was someone's personal harpoon that they decorated to their liking. Um,
There's also the auroch bone,
the Auroch
which was
bone.
all we'll throw in.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. There's been auroch bones. Things from the Doggerland site do carry decoration, and this could just be that details like that have been preserved. Like I'm assuming things that are found in Africa that are older would also have um, things that are found in Africa or North America would all like points and such would also have decoration on them, but they're just not in such prime
Condition.
conditions as being buried in peat.
Yeah, yeah, and we'll get into that in a second. I wanted to circle back to something we mentioned earlier because I should have read my document before we started recording, but here we are. Um, we mentioned earlier that it was only recently we found a potential site of human habitation. Um, I have this pulled up. In 2019, a hammerstone was pulled from a submerged river called the Southern River. Um, Now, a hammerstone is a stone used for hammering. It's indicative of tool use and tool creation. And according to Simon Fitch, this was the quote the first directly prospected find from the North Sea. Uh, by directly prospected, they means they went down and pulled it up. They dove in and grabbed it. It wasn't just pulled up by a fishing trawler. It was found near a chalk cliff, so a cliff made of chalk material. And again, according to Fitch, it suggests guys were going there to tool up. So
Hmm,
essentially, they found what they believe to be a site where people would create tools using
like an ancient
local.
workshop.
Potentially, also just could be like materials were abundant there, so it was just convenient that whenever someone needed to make or repair something, they would just go and get the materials.
Mhm.
So I just wanted to circle back to that because we mentioned it earlier.
Right.
But Hawk, you mentioned the tools being so well preserved due to being stuck in peat. Why don't you first off, what is peat?
So peat is a thick substance that's created when you have plant matter that is slowly, like very slowly decomposing in an anaerobic, highly acidic environment. Um, this means that when stuff goes into peat, it doesn't really break down. Decomposition doesn't really happen. You might know about bog bodies from Ireland. These are bodies that were either purposefully put there or someone dies in the peat bog, and their bodies are preserved hundreds, even thousands of years into the future. Um, so peat is actually really good at uh, preserving things like this. So preserving the details that would have been on this tool that, if they were in another area, would have been lost by the time archaeologists are actually digging it up.
Yeah, yeah. The North Sea is essentially a giant time capsule for tools and remains. There is it's an archaeologist's wet dream, literally wet. Um,
Oh,
yeah, I know. And I pulled up here from the International Peatland Society the direct definition of peat just for the sake of it. Peat is the surface organic layer of a soil that consists of partially decomposed organic matter derived mostly from plant material, which has accumulated under conditions of waterlogging, oxygen deficiency, high acidity, and nutrient deficiency. So, basically, what Hawk said, and it's all those conditions are, just so happen to be really, really good at preserving natural material.
Hmm.
Yeah. So when the trawler Kalinda hauled up that massive peat in 1931, they essentially opened up a natural time capsule to find the Kalinda harpoon.
Yep. Um, Preserving, but we'll show up a couple other images of tools or artifacts or pieces of bone that have that people decorating them has been preserved.
Yeah. And just a little local tie-in. If we're in New England, I imagine most of our audience is from there. If you're not, sorry, but what are you doing here? Who told you about us? Uh, if you've ever been in one of the various wetlands or whatever, in New England, you've probably stepped in peat and sunk about a foot in.
There's peat. There's peat in New England.
Yeah, it's like
Where's there peat in New England?
everywhere, dude.
What? I know there's
Yeah,
bogs in New England.
yeah,
But
they're full of
what?
peat. It's
Not
in
all bogs are peat.
not all bogs, but like there's a lot of peat in New England. I can pull up
Okay, like
the International Peatland
okay,
Society
like
has
the
a map showing where peat forms in the world, and it's essentially New England, and then like all of Scandinavia, and then the North Sea area, or like the hot spots.
what?
Yeah,
Okay, because like the bogs, like I've been to like, well, what's a good example? Like if you live in Boston, there's Black Pond Bog. That's not a peat bog, it's a sphagnum bog. It's a bunch of moss called sphagnum moss floating on top of water. But what? That's insane. I did not know that there was peat in New England.
it's hold on. I'm pulling up the national or the International Peatland Society right now so I can get their map up. But
Yeah, put that map up on screen.
while I'm doing that, um, so we went over what peat
What do
is.
we want to go? Do we want to go into the controversies surrounding this now?
Uh, Probably. Let's before we do that, let's just recap. So Doggerland um sunk. Sorry, let me formulate this. Doggerland exposed 22,000 years ago, sunk 8,000 years ago. So that's 20,000 BC to 6,000 BC. Um, it was a wooded forest. It was the perfect place to live if you're a hunter gatherer. And
It was the place.
yeah,
It
but
was the place in Holocene Europe.
yeah, me and gang in Doggerland during the Holocene. Um, but yeah, and so eventually, after 14,000 years of the ice sheets receding and melting, um, and it so this will actually lead us into the controversy. Towards the end of, I'll say, Doggerland's lifespan, sea level rise was getting to about 2 meters a century, or 2 meters a century, basically like 2 meters
It's something
every
like
100 years.
yeah, around that. Yeah, at the end of the Holocene, with the ice caps melting, global sea levels rose by 450 feet.
Yeah. Now Doggerland's sinking was hurried
Gradually.
along by, I believe it was an undersea avalanche, which caused a tsunami
Yeah,
off the coast
it
of
caused a
Norway.
tsunami. So it was hurried up, but I mean the point still stands that Doggerland did sink because of global climate change.
Yeah,
One of the most popular pop one of the most densely populated areas by humans um, in prehistory was sunk due to global climate change.
yep, yeah. Um, so
So
to put that into perspective, imagine if you're living by the coast and within 50 years the sea level rose by a meter. It doesn't sound like much, but if within your lifespan, what was a like a hangout spot or just a good place for fishing or just, like a local landmark, if within your lifespan that disappeared under the waves, that's essentially what the Doggerlanders, the people of Doggerland, were facing.
Right, so it wasn't a drought. Like, not everyone in Doggerland was just drowned instantly, but the Doggerlanders, what do we want to call them?
Doggerlanders.
The Doggerlanders were slowly drowned out, and those who didn't leave would have eventually been wound up on Dogger Bank Island, until that eventually flooded too.
Yeah. Yeah, most of them just migrated away, but um,
Most of them
mo-
would have probably migrated away as things were flooding,
yeah,
because these were. It's not like they
hunter
had farms.
gatherers.
These were hunter gatherers. They were probably already somewhat nomadic.
Yeah, yeah, these were mostly nomadic peoples. Um,
So it wasn't that bad, but this is at a rate um that if it were happening today, areas like large cities on coasts like New York, LA,
New Orleans.
yep, New Orleans would be underwater within several lifespans.
Yeah. Well, I guess I shouldn't have mentioned New Orleans because it's already underwater, but uh,
Isn't it like the worst placed city in the world?
I think so. It might be.
Something crazy like that is.
Anyway, so that'll lead us
It's
into
either the
something
worst placed city in the US or the worst placed city in the world, New
probably in the
Orleans.
U.S. I imagine Pompeii was placed worse. Anyways, so that'll lead us into a
Anywhere
little bit of
placed
our
in
discussion
France.
later. But oh, actually, Hawk, do you want to talk about the climate change now, or do you want to talk about the real drama?
Well, I mean, we've covered the climate change.
Yeah.
It's just
Um.
like yeah, this could probably Doggerland could be used in the future to raise awareness for climate
Actually,
change.
let's get into that just a little bit more. So, as I mentioned, the Doggerlanders were
Around
facing a sea level rise of 2 meters every 100 years or so. Um, we are now getting to a point where, in the not so distant future, that's the same rate of sea level rise that we'll be facing.
Mhm.
I don't have an exact estimation right with me, but within you know a few like 100 or so years, if we don't curb the current rate of global warming and climate change, will be in their shoes. We'll be getting flooded out, during our lifespans. And while it was true, as you said, Hawk, that this was one of the most a pretty densely populated place at the time, uh, within the last 100 years, the population has shot up by what, 6 billion?
Yeah, Earth
Yeah,
is way more densely populated than it was then.
yeah, and we're no longer a nomadic species. Um,
Right, we have cities that will go underwater.
yeah,
I think it only takes like a sea level rise of like, now do not quote me here, but it's something small to the point where like the entire country of Bangladesh, if we were looking at a sea level rise of what is it, 2 meters for every
every
50
100
years.
years.
Yeah, the entirety of Bangladesh would be underwater, I think, in like 200 years.
Wow.
The entire country gone. We're like
RIP to
everywhere that's
our one Bangladeshi viewer.
there's no way he's watching this.
There's no way we have one Bangladeshi viewer. Uh,
There's no way we I don't maybe in the future, but there's no
yeah,
way we have a
there is no
Bangladeshi
future. It's
viewer.
gonna be gone. Anyways, point being,
Anyways, the point being, Doggerland can be used to raise awareness about climate change.
yeah. Um, actually, I was looking this up earlier. England, with if we get that rate of sea level rise, 90% of England will be gone in only like a few 100 years.
What? I can't wait that long.
Maybe we should hurry it up.
Exactly.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, just think about that. If you live by the coast, actually, yeah, right now, if you live by the coast or you know people who do, think of something, in that area that you care about, that you cherish. Now imagine in 50 years that's gone. That's underwater.
I I don't think we gotta convince people watching this
I
of
know,
the
but
dangers
still,
of climate change.
I'm trying to get the point across.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. So yeah, beating a dead horse at this point, but Doggerland is a warning to us about just how bad sea level rise can get if we don't stop it.
Mhm.
But
Alright,
moving on
well,
from that that little bit
the
morbid bit,
to
let's
the
talk
current
about,
controversy.
yeah, current wait, current
Yeah,
controversy.
so,
Hawk, this is archaeology. We're talking about the past year. What do you mean current controversy? Is there drama in the
well
archaeological community?
well, there just might be. So, Jacob, you know how the North Sea has been a huge area for industrial, especially in oil. It's been a huge area of industrial work, specifically oil, right? The North Sea is littered with active and deactivated oil rigs.
Hmm.
Well, the North Sea has also been currently, it's beginning to become dotted with another man made structure,
What's that man-made structure?
wind farms.
Wind farms. Ooh.
Wind farms. Now, we here at Under the Dirt, despite what they may say, we like green energy, right? We were just telling you about how bad climate change is. We like green energy. We this could be seen as a huge win.
Yeah.
But there's one problem. When wind farms go up, the ability to study Doggerland goes away.
Yeah.
Because if the ocean is littered with wind farms, you can't exactly do seismic readings of it, and you can't just start ripping up the ocean floor.
Yeah. You can't really, dive down to the bottom when there is a massive windmill in the way.
Mhm.
And there are also some, ecological concerns of disturbing the natural environment of, you know, fish and whatnot living there. But I think that gets taken into account for the most part, right?
Yeah, I don't feel like that's a huge issue. Wind farms, I mean, they're not that bad ecologically.
Yeah. I still propose
There's
nuclear
there's
is better, but.
there's way worse things. Um,
So just to put
but
into perspective why this is sort of an issue for archaeologists. The current capacity of energy production and yeah, of energy production in the North Sea is 30 gigawatts. Yeah, that's almost enough to power 3 DeLoreans, right? What was it? 7.2 gigawatts to power the DeLorean or something?
what's a DeLorean?
From Back to the Future.
That
You've never
I don't recall.
we're gonna get Hawk to watch Back to the Future.
I never watched Back to the Future.
All right, I'm probably getting the number wrong, but anyways, the plans of green energy groups and northern European governments have the energy capacity of the North Sea being up to 300 gigawatts by 2050. So that's a
Oh, is this all green energy?
of like wind farms and energy islands. Yes,
I'd love to see it.
yeah. So that's a
But you know
10
who doesn't love to
times
see it?
increase. What were you saying, Hawk?
Right. But you know who doesn't love to see it?
Who does love to see it?
Archaeologists.
No, poor
Actually, that's
archaeologists.
not entirely true. None of the current archaeologists that have been working on Doggerland oppose the green energy initiatives at all. None of them oppose the building of wind farms. So it's not actually that big of a controversy. It's just they would like to talk with the people to see if they can do research on the area first before the wind farms go up.
Yeah, yeah. And it is
It
especially
actually,
harm harmful to the potential archaeological value because while wind farms are one thing, current energy programs would see artificial islands being built to support green energy production in the North Sea. Because
Mhm.
currently what they're doing is just they're just putting up these jackets, they call them. They're just giant metal platforms to, hold up the windmills and whatnot, um, which are fine for right now, but they're not the most efficient. So they want to build literal artificial islands, and you can guess how that would kind of mess with stuff that's underwater, right?
Right, and especially in
Especially
archaeology,
undersea
where
cables.
yeah. Um, so this messes with archaeology. Stuff like this has happened before, and we'll definitely talk about things where archaeology can be really sensitive because once something like this is gone, it's gone.
Yeah.
You don't, right? Like, um, uh, I'm sure we'll end up talking about this later, but like the Spinosaurus in where was it? Munich, Germany.
I've never heard of that.
You never heard of this? Okay.
No.
So the first Spinosaurus specimen that was ever dug up, and it was a very complete one. Not totally, but it was very was brought to Munich, Germany. But this was the middle of World War II,
Mm.
and the fossils were blown up in an air raid
Oh.
of the city,
Oh.
and we would probably know a whole lot more about Spinosaurus if it weren't for the fact that it was blown up.
Well, you know what? Shouldn't have died in Munich, Germany. Sorry.
Shouldn't have. Yeah, you're gonna die first in the Cretaceous and then a second time in Munich, Germany.
Yeah. It's the Spinosaurus' fault, for real.
But yeah, archaeological and paleontological things are really sensitive. So I don't know, it's not that big a deal. All of the archaeologists are totally on board with the green energy. They just like um there to be communication between the two parties. So
Yeah. It's the reason it's so sensitive is because context is really, really important. Anyone who's ever been taken out of context knows that. Like think of it like a crime scene. When someone is, this is a little dark example, but when someone is murdered, the one thing you don't do is you don't move the body. See the John Benet Ramsey case as to why that's so important. Um, you don't move the body, you don't touch the scene until forensics gets there because you need to know exactly how it was at time of death or at time of the incident to figure out what happened. The same
right.
applies to archaeology. Um, this is why one of the rules of archaeological ethics is, you know, you're like a Boy Scout, leave no trace.
Mhm.
Um, you don't want to mess with anything until it's like you got down the information that's there. Um, so if you're ever at like an indigenous site, a Native American site, and you find like pot shards or whatever, don't touch it because that can mess with the context of the scene. You know, and that's just
Mhm.
why it's so important that we figure out what's down there before we mess with it. Because once we mess with it, there's no
It's
undoing it.
gone.
Yeah.
Right. Um yeah, and as we said before, look if you're really feeling like, oh man, Doggerland, I want this to be my thing. I want to know more. There is a book you can order. You can buy. It's called Doggerland: Lost World Under the North Sea. That'll probably tell you way more than we ever could about Doggerland. And additionally, keep your eyes out because Doggerland is still a relatively new, recent discovery,
Yeah.
right?
There,
I
there's
mean,
also. Go ahead.
as far as I'm concerned, it would be like I don't know. I can't think of a good analogy. But the point is that we've really only hit the tip of the iceberg with Doggerland right now. So
We're
like,
waiting for
keep
the new
out.
lore drop of Doggerland.
We're waiting for a new Doggerland war drop. So keep your eyes out for more Doggerland stuff. Maybe we'll make a follow up video on it.
Yeah,
Um,
maybe. There's also there's the Bradford Academy in the UK. They have a website that is
mhm,
essentially like um the most up to date. I believe that's where Vincent Gaffney works. If not, they work closely with him, and it is
mhm,
like it's a very up to date website that they have running.
mhm,
So that will everything we're mentioning will be in the description. So just check down there for our sources. Um,
yep. But that's gonna finish it up for today. I think.
yeah, let's just to like wrap up. Let's go through our points one more time. To see if make sure there's nothing we missed. Um, peat, peat and peat bogs, really important for archaeology.
They
Really good
preserve
at
stuff.
yeah, really good at preserving stuff. They also make good fuel. I think you were mentioning to me earlier before we started recording.
Oh yeah. So it's the first stage of coal.
Mm,
So it's very, very, very early coal.
yeah. So yeah,
Coal.
there's that peat bog. Well, there is actually a peat bog in, I believe, Florida. The Windover bog body was there. We might do an episode on that in the future.
Yep.
So there's peat. There is uh, the Green Sea initiatives or green energy initiatives in the North Sea, which are uh, a bit of a threat to the archaeological integrity of Doggerland in the North Sea. That's an active situation. Um, and actually, Hawk, let's finish this up with a question. How should archaeologists and these, green energy groups and these European governments, what can they do to work together to,
I mean,
preserve the archaeological integrity of the site while still, combating climate change? Because, like we said, the climate change flooded Doggerland, and it's getting close to flooding us out. But we still so fighting that is a big concern. But we still need to preserve the information we can from the site. So it's like these two conflicting causes we have here.
yeah. So one of the things I would do is I would assume green energy initiatives are already doing scans at the bottom before they build their windmills. Um, they could simply allow archaeologists to work in an area before the windmill goes up. And even though it's really hard for an archaeologist to be like, yeah, we're done, we're sure that we've fully looked at this area, that would be a way to compromise between the two groups.
Yeah. Um, it would be. It's unfortunate that uh, private companies and governments even more so are so reluctant to hand over information for whatever reason.
Yep. Oh man, we'll get into that.
Yeah, yeah.
If we do anything on missing 411, anything with the Canadian Mounties,
Well, don't get me started on the RCMP and their
the RCMB and their reluctance to give any information to anyone.
yeah, we'll get into that in a
Um,
later episode. But we should we'll look into this more and we'll update you eventually. The first artificial island that I mentioned, I believe it's Queen Elizabeth Island, will be under construction or finished by 2026. So,
be
we'll
updated.
see if they actually give them the seismic data or not.
Mhm.
Um,
Um,
so your suggestion is to work with archaeologists and just provide seismic data.
provide
I
seismic data. Let them work in an area before these constructions happen.
Yeah, yeah. It would be so helpful if they could provide if arch well first if archaeologists could work with like dive teams because you know how
Mhm.
oil and drilling companies they use dive teams to work on their rigs. It would be so helpful if archaeologists were allowed to dive with them, but there's hurdles
Mhm.
with that. So I think I agree with you
Right.
in your suggestion. Also just taking archaeology seriously as a science when it comes to
Or a lot
governmental
of science,
programs.
seriously. Like, general research is usually not taken very seriously.
Yeah. T Tell the government you're
Um,
an anthropologist and then ask them for a grant. See what happens. Uh, But yeah, I think that's about it.
that covers everything.
That's Doggerland.
Yeah. So tell us what you thought in the comments. If you know, maybe you know more. Maybe you're just a Doggerland expert. You can
Maybe you
correct
were
us
one
on
of the
things.
Doggerlanders.
Maybe you were one of the Doggerlanders. You can tell you were there. You can tell us things that we missed. Or if you have any future suggestions for stuff you want us to cover, leave it down below. Um, yeah, that about does it.
Yeah. Hawk, what do you think our next episode is going to be if we have that
Oh,
decided yet, so
I don't
we know
know.
what to look forward to?
I'm not sure. Were you thinking something more conspiracy? Because that is one of the things we cover.
Yeah. Bigfoot episode.
You know?
I want to do that as like an episode 5, so not too far from
Mm,
now, but a few months.
or I was thinking topics that we're going to come back to a lot. Bigfoot, missing 411. Um, these are things that could be series instead of individual episodes.
Maybe.
Right. Something like that. Or I was thinking the Lions of Savo. I'm not entirely sure yet.
Yeah. We'll see. We'll see. Next episode, coming within the month,
Probably
hopefully. We'll be better at it
it
this
will
time,
be
promise.
there will be a much faster turnaround for that one than there was for this one. We promise.
Um,
That about does it.
yeah, all our
We'll
sources will be in the description, as well as the
description
Instagram.
as well as the
Um,
Instagram. Don't forget to subscribe. We're easy to find. There'll be a link to that in the description.
yep. And like you said, subscribe, turn on notifications, because again, posting monthly, we'll hope you remember us by now, but I don't blame you if you forget. Um,
Yep.
like if you liked us rambling about Doggerland. If you dislike it, don't you dare leave a dislike. I'll find you. Tell us why in the comments so we can improve. Um,
Yeah.
I think that about
And
does it.
we'll catch you next time.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us today.